Beneath Fort Campbell's starless Kentucky sky, the vast grasslands known as Back 40 drowned in thick darkness, as if swallowing all light. Strange tales, like wisps of fog, slithered through barracks, passed from trembling recruits to grizzled veterans. Fort Campbell, home of the legendary 101st Airborne, the Screaming Eagles, wasn't just a forge for warriors, but a land steeped in mystery where the inexplicable lurked in shadows. On patrol nights, when a faint crescent moon glimmered through sparse trees, stories of fleeting figures, chilling howls, and the sense of being watched came alive. This is Jake Thompson's story, a 22-year-old soldier, and a fateful night that forever changed how he saw those woods. But to grasp what happened, we must return to where it began. Straddling Kentucky and Tennessee, Fort Campbell brimmed with history, from World War II's fire to Vietnam's haunting years. Spanning thousands of untamed acres, Back 40 was ideal for grueling tactical training. Night marches, mock ambushes. Yet it was more than a proving ground. It was a realm of legends, where tales of specters and cryptic creatures were whispered during shift breaks. Old Cold War bunkers, once hiding nuclear warheads, now stood moss-covered like giant tombs. Nearby, a small cemetery held 5 graves of German POWs from 1943 to 1946, and an odd tomb of an early 20th century African-American civilian, deepening the eerie aura. Some said restless spirits still roamed, tethered to this land. Jake Thompson, an Ohio native, carried youth's zeal and a recruit's naivety. Months into service, he still jested about awful MRs or dreamt of weekend football. With short brown hair and bright eyes, Jake stayed upbeat, even when a lieutenant got them lost in a navigation drill. He scoffed at the ghost stories veterans spun, whispers of tall figures, red glowing eyes, or bone-rattling growls. Just pranks to scare newbies, he told himself, smirking at a tale of a Fort Bragg dogman. Yet, deep down, he couldn't deny Back 40's strange weight. The air felt heavy, as if the land held secrets humans weren't meant to know. Fort Campbell was more than a training hub. It was a crossroads of history and myth. Rusty iron bunker doors creaked, once guarding top-secret military plans. Red dirt roads snaking through Back 40, now blanketed in dry leaves, had seen countless soldiers' boots across generations. A veteran once told Jake of ley lines, supernatural energy veins crisscrossing the land, drawing otherworldly entities. Jake laughed, likening it to an X-Files episode. But his first step into Back 40 sent a chill down his spine, making him wonder what truly hid in the dark. Each night as barracks lights dimmed and crickets hang, Back 40 became another world. Patrolling soldiers, armed with night vision goggles and creaky PRC-77 radios, felt small against its vastness. Jake was no exception. He'd heard of radios losing signal for no reason, giant footprints vanishing, and howls that made even seasoned troops shudder. Probably coyotes, he reasoned, but he knew no animal could mimic a woman's scream mixed with a deep, primal growl. Jake's story began one October night in 1950, tasked with patrolling near the old Clarksville base, where eerie bunkers loomed amid trees. With an M16 slung over his shoulder and a flashlight swaying at his hip, he stepped into the dark, unaware this night would haunt him forever. He joked with his squad about ordering Domino's pizza if they survived the shift. a young soldier's ritual to ease tension. But as the faint moon shone and leaves rustled without wind, Jake sensed something off. A vague feeling as if the forest breathed, watched, waited. Fort Campbell, for all its modern military sheen, couldn't hide its past's scars. Tales of German POWs, abandoned bunkers, and haunting patrols were part of its fabric, like Hueys over Vietnam or Humvees roaring down dirt tracks. Jake, with a young man's curiosity and a soldier's courage, entered Back 40 without doubt. But as that night unfolded, he'd learned some things defied logic or training. And Back 40, with its ancient secrets, would never let him forget. Under October 2005 sky, Fort Campbell's biting Kentucky cold seeped through layers of fatigues, testing the resolve of those treading the dark. Jake Thompson, a 22-year-old rookie with an M16 slung over his shoulder, led his small patrol through the wild grasslands of Back 40. Their mission was almost mundane. Check the perimeter near the old Clarksville base, where 1950s ammo bonkers stood silent, cloaked in moss and memory. Jake, night vision goggles dangling from his helmet, felt a flicker of thrill, not fear, but the excitement of a young soldier still enamored with being part of the 101st Airborne, the Screaming Eagles. He smirked, picturing the shift as dull as a turkey MRE, which he and his squad likened to cardboard soaked in regret. Beside Jake strode Mike, a burly Texan with an infectious grin and a knack for Bigfoot tales, as if he'd met the beast on a hometown hunt. Behind them was Sarah, the sharp-eyed comms specialist, unflappable even when the creaky PRC-77 radio acted up. The team moved in formation, boots crunching on dry earth, blending with the chirping crickets into a monotonous night tune. A crescent moon hung faint like a dying candle, barely lighting sparse trees and leaving deep pockets of shadow. Jake sensed Back 40's vastness, an endless expanse where sounds vanished into eerie stillness. They'd heard plenty about Back 40, whispers during shift breaks, over cold coffee, when darkness thickened. Unexplained howls, fleeting shapes in night vision, the feeling of being watched by something inhuman. Jake scoffed at these, chalking them up to veteran pranks for green recruits. He recalled a navigation drill where a lieutenant led their platoon in circles around Kyle Lake until midnight, only to find they were yards from the rally point. Old-timers love to exaggerate, he thought. Yet, deep down, Back 40's uncanny air made his neck prickle. Nearing the old bunkers, the air grew heavy like an invisible blanket pressing their chests. Jake felt it first, a sudden, unnatural silence as crickets fell mute, leaving a ringing void. He halted, signaling the team to stop. Mike, gripping his rifle, tilted his head, straining for a sound he wasn't sure he wanted to hear. Sarah, ever vigilant, checked the radio, but the PRC-77 was dead, as if its battery quit at the worst moment, a running army joke about tech betraying when needed most. Jake listened, catching a low, faint hiss, like wind through leaves. But the night was windless, and the sound seemed to rise from deep in the forest, beyond the moon's reach. Jake flipped down his night vision, scanning the dim trees. The goggles' green glow showed only curling branches and brush, nothing amiss. He reassured himself it might be a coyote, or worse, a feral hog. Beasts he'd heard could weigh hundreds of pounds and charge like demons. Sarah, her calm voice tinged with a tremor, nodded as if agreeing. But as they prepared to move, a new sound shredded the night. Not a hiss, but a deep, guttural roar rising from the earth itself. It wasn't any animal Jake knew, not bear, wolf, or cougar. The sound vibrated in his chest, his heart pounding as if trying to escape. Mike's face paled under the moonlight, his grip tightening on his rifle, eyes fixed on the dark. Tension rippled through the team, but Jake fought to stay steady. A rookie, his youthful courage or stubbornness refused to show weakness. He signaled to press on, their steps slow, deliberate, as if a snapped twig might wake something slumbering. In his mind, flashes of Predator, a childhood movie, surfaced. The invisible beast, red eyes, a roar turning hunters into prey. Jake shook it off, scolding his runaway imagination. But deep down, he knew that sound wasn't something training or an M16 could handle. Back 40, with its menacing stillness, seemed to watch them. Each step drew Jake deeper into a realm where he wasn't welcome. That primal roar echoed in his mind, a warning from an ancient entity lurking in the shadows. He didn't know that in mere minutes, his team would face something beyond all their training. And Back 40, with its timeless secrets, would ensure they left marked forever. Beneath the faint crescent moon, Jake Thompson's team crept toward the old Clarksville base, a desolate corner of Fort Campbell where time seemed frozen since World War II. Gray concrete bunkers, cloaked in moss and tangled weeds, loomed in the sparse forest like giant tombs guarding secrets no one dared name. The air was heavy, thick with damp earth and an indefinable weight, as if history itself breathed, slow and haunting. Jake, M16 slung over his shoulder, felt unease stir in his chest, though he masked it with a rookie's bravado. Back 40, vast and menacingly still, seemed to whisper warnings he wasn't ready to hear. Jake had heard tales of the old Clarksville base during shift breaks, over cold coffee when barracks' shadows deepened. They spoke of 5 German POWs buried here, held at Fort Campbell from 1943 to 1946 amid World War II's fire. Nearby, an odd grave of an African-American civilian from the early 20th century added to the mystique. A veteran once told Jake these bunkers hid nuclear warheads during the Cold War, doomsday machines guarded by soldiers haunted by apocalyptic dread. Most chilling were rumors that the POW's restless spirits lingered, trapped in this land, unable to find peace. Jake, with an Ohio pragmatist's heart, dismissed these as old soldiers' yarns, but facing the eerie bunkers, he couldn't shake a growing disquiet. The team split to check the bunkers, stepping carefully over dry leaves and snapped twigs. Jake and Mike, his closest comrade, a burly Texan with an easy grin and a penchant for Bigfoot tales, approached one together. Its rusted iron door screeched as they pushed it open, the piercing sound echoing in the stillness like a warning from the past. Inside, a musty stench hit them, thick and stifling, as if time had sealed life itself within the stained concrete walls. Jake's flashlight swept across, revealing crude graffiti from generations of soldiers, scrawled curses, unit names, a stone diary of those who'd been here. He smirked, trying to ease tension by likening the place to a cheap horror flick, like Friday the 13th from his childhood. But the humor faded as he ventured deeper into the dark. A sudden chill raced down Jake's spine, as if the bunker's air had frozen. He stopped, breath shallow, feeling someone stood just behind him, close enough to hear their breathing. He spun, heart pounding, but saw only Mike cautiously checking a far corner, his flashlight beam dancing on the walls. No one else was there, yet the sensation of invisible eyes watching clung to him. Jake shook it off, blaming the barracks' ghost stories. But then, like a blade through the night, a horrific sound erupted. The scream was unlike anything Jake had heard. It began as a woman's desperate, heart-wrenching cry, sharp and gutting, then morphed into a deep, guttural growl, almost inhuman. It vibrated in his chest, his heart racing as if to break free. Jake and Mike bolted from the bunker, feet barely touching ground, gasping in the frigid air. Outside, under the faint moon, Sarah and the others stood pale, eyes wide with terror. They'd heard it too, and no one dared call it a bobcat, though the thought flickered as a desperate grasp at reason. Sarah, gripping the PRC-77 radio, froze, staring into the pitch-black forest ahead. Jake flipped down his night vision, scanning trees about 50 meters away. At first, the goggles' green glow showed only dim branches and brush. Then, like lightning in a storm, he saw it. A towering figure at least 8 feet tall, moving so fast it was nearly a blur. It wasn't any animal he knew, not bear, deer, or hog. For a fleeting moment, its red eyes blazed in the dark, like smoldering coals, locking onto Jake as if piercing his soul. Then, as swiftly as it appeared, the figure vanished, melting into the night, leaving Jake rooted, breath ragged, heart hammering. The old Clarksville base, with its grim bunkers and forgotten graves, seemed to cradle a curse from the past. That scream, that figure, those red eyes weren't random. They were a reminder that Back 40 wasn't for the curious, that some things in the dark didn't want disturbance. Jake, hands trembling on his rifle, knew he'd crossed an unseen line, and Clarksville, with its secrets, wouldn't let him forget. In Back 5's stifling darkness, Jake Thompson's team stood frozen, M16s aimed at the impenetrable forest where the crescent moon's light couldn't reach. The horrific scream from the old Clarksville base still echoed in their minds, a sharp wound that wouldn't heal. Sarah, the sharp-eyed comms specialist, ordered them to press on, her voice straining for calm, but Jake saw her hand tremble as it gripped the PRC-77 radio. The call was made. Head back to the rally point where their Humvee waited, where barracks lights might ease the fear crushing their chests. But as they moved, a chilling sensation clung to each step, the feeling of being watched, as if invisible eyes stalked from the deep shadows of the trees. Each of Jake's steps felt heavier, as if the earth itself held him back. Rustling leaves sounded from nearby bushes, though no breeze stirred the night. He sensed it, a presence, neither human nor animal, but something ancient, feral, pacing them in the dark. Mike, his closest comrade, usually quick with Bigfoot jests or Texas football talk, was silent, eyes locked on the forest. A sudden putrid stench hit Jake, thick like rotting meat mixed with damp earth, forcing him to hold his breath. It wasn't like any animal he'd encountered hunting deer with his dad in Ohio. It felt like a warning from something not of this world. Then a piercing howl tore through the air, far closer than the earlier growl. It sliced like a knife, startling the team, hands tightening on rifles, breaths ragged in the frigid air. Jake flicked on his flashlight, its white beam cutting the dark, sweeping across trees and brush. For a fleeting moment, the light caught something that froze his blood. A towering creature, at least 12 feet tall, stood on 2 legs, its body cloaked in long, matted black fur, like a nightmare made flesh. It wasn't a bear, wolf, or anything from Jake's books or Discovery Channel. Its face, if it had one, was shrouded in shadow, revealing only blazing red eyes, glowing like smoldering embers, staring directly at the soldiers as if piercing their souls. Time seemed to halt. The creature stood motionless for mere seconds, but to Jake, it felt like a lifetime. Its presence wasn't just physical, it invaded his mind, a wordless, menacing whisper. Mike, beside him, seemed to feel it too, his shoulders rigid, breaths short and sharp. A memory flashed in Jake's mind, a Fort Bragg veteran's tale of Dogman, a half-human, half-beast, prowling remote woods, hunting those who trespassed its domain. Jake had never believed, but now, facing this, certainty crumbled. Then, swift as a specter, the creature turned, bolting into the forest, vanishing among the trees with a speed no human or animal could match. The rustling faded, leaving the team in a terrifying silence. Jake wanted to run, to race to the Humvee, and erase it all, but courage, or rookie stubbornness, held him fast. He knew they had to report, though he doubted anyone would believe them. Who'd trust exhausted young soldiers spinning tales of a forest monster? Sarah, hands still shaking on the radio, tried contacting the rally point, but the signal flickered as if Back 40 itself blocked them. The PRC-77, notorious for dying at the worst times, became a bitter army joke, but no one laughed. They hurried to the Humvee, steps frantic, none daring to look back. Jake's pounding heart was the only sound he heard, mingling with his team's gasping breaths. The forest, once a familiar training ground, now felt like a menacing maze, every tree hiding peril. Jake couldn't shake those red eyes, as if they'd burned into his soul. He wondered if it was a hallucination born of stress and darkness, or something real, a secret Back 40 had guarded through generations. When they finally glimpsed the Humvee's faint lights, relief flickered, but it was quickly snuffed by a cold truth. They'd faced something beyond all military training. That creature, with its blazing eyes and colossal form, wasn't just a shadow in the night. It was a reminder that Back 40 didn't belong to humans, that some things in the dark shunned disturbance. Jake, still clutching his M16, climbed aboard, but he knew that night would never leave him. And Back 40, with its ancient secrets, stood waiting, silent and threatening, ready to test anyone who dared enter its domain. As Fort Campbell's faint barracks lights came into view, Jake Thompson and his patrol team exhaled, but their relief was fragile, like glass ready to shatter. The terrifying encounter in Back 40, the gut-wrenching scream, blazing red eyes, and the colossal silhouette of a creature not of this world, clung to their minds, a nightmare that wouldn't fade. Crammed in the Humvee, no one spoke. Only the engine's growl mingling with their pounding heartbeats. Jake, still gripping his M16, stared out the window, where the forest darkness seemed to watch, silent and menacing. He knew that night had changed him, etching a fear no military training could erase. At the base, they reported to their lieutenant, a weathered man with a stern face and eyes sharp as blades. Jake recounted everything, the deep growl, the putrid stench, the towering creature with fiery eyes. But the lieutenant smirked, his half-smile dripping with skepticism. "Sure you didn't mistake a hog for a monster," he said, voice tinged with mockery, as if addressing kids hooked on Hollywood horror. Yet, Jake caught a fleeting glint of unease in his eyes, as if he'd heard similar tales and chose to bury them in silence. Jake didn't argue, but he knew what he saw wasn't a trick of the dark. It was real, and it was still out there in Back 40. In the days that followed, Jake grew quieter, his gaze often drifting, as if seeking answers to unvoiced questions. He dug into Back 40's lore, seeking stories from veterans during shift breaks. Tales he'd once dismissed as pranks now formed a chilling puzzle. An old soldier named Tom, with salt and pepper hair and hands calloused from decades of soldiering, shared legends over black coffee, his voice low like he was spilling a forbidden secret. He claimed Back 40 sat on a ley line, a supernatural energy vein crossing the earth, drawing strange entities. "This place isn't just deer and coyotes, kid," he said, eyes distant. "Something older, meaner, doesn't like being disturbed." Tom's words sent a shiver through Jake, but they also sparked curiosity. He began noticing oddities he'd once ignored. Comrades reported mysterious knocks on barracks doors at midnight when hallways stood empty. A young soldier swore he saw a shadow dart through his night vision, too fast for a human. Night drills in Back 40 now carried unease, as if every bush and tree hid unseen eyes. Jake, despite his tough facade, couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, as if the creature had marked him with an indelible stain. One afternoon, as golden sunlight bathed Kyle Lake, a familiar camping spot near Back 40, Jake stumbled on a massive footprint in the wet earth. Twice the size of his own, its sharp contours didn't match any animal he knew. His heart raced, part thrill, part fear. He called Mike, who was sipping a Coke nearby, to see it. But minutes later, when they returned, the print was gone, as if swept away by an unseen broom. Mike shrugged, joking that the Air Force is messing with us, but his strained smile betrayed unease. Both knew the truth was far darker. Back 40 guarded its secrets. Jake never ventured into Back 40 alone after that night. He still joined drills, laughed with comrades about awful MREs or weekend football, but deep down he'd changed. Stories of Dogman, Bigfoot, or German POW spirits were no longer jokes. They were fragments of a vast mystery. Fort Campbell's grim bunkers and endless forests had kept through generations. Jake wondered if the creature was real or a product of stress and shadows. But closing his eyes, he saw those red eyes blazing like fire, as if waiting for his return. Back 40 stood, silent and enigmatic, like a book no one dared finish. Jake, with a soldier's courage, knew some questions shouldn't be answered. Deep within, he felt that creature, or whatever lurked in the dark, still watched, waiting, ready to remind trespassers this land wasn't theirs. Fort Campbell, for all its military glory, remained a weave of history and myth, and Jake, willingly or not, had become part of its story. Beneath Fort Campbell's endless Kentucky night sky, Back 40 stood silent and unmoving, a sentinel guarding secrets never meant to be unveiled. Jake Thompson, the rookie who entered its woods with youthful courage and naivety, now carried an indelible memory, a confrontation with something beyond all his training. Was that towering figure with blazing red eyes Dogman, Bigfoot, or a hallucination born of stress and shadows? Even Jake couldn't say for sure. But deep in his soul, he knew Back 40 wasn't for the curious, and what lurked in its forest defied human understanding. Fort Campbell buzzed as ever, with Humvees roaring, young soldiers laughing during breaks, and gunfire echoing from ranges. Rookies like Jake trained on, preparing for enemies, tangible on battlefields, intangible in their minds. But Back 40, with its thousands of wild acres and grim bunkers, remained a world apart, where history and myth intertwined. Tales of howls, fleeting shapes, and giant footprints were as much a part of the base as Huey choppers over Vietnam. Jake, though back to a soldier's routine, no longer saw the forest the same. Whenever his gaze drifted to back 40, those red eyes burned in his memory, a reminder that some mysteries shouldn't be probed. In the weeks after the encounter, Jake sought solace in routine, weekend football, jokes about awful MREs, teasing comrades about the lieutenant's latest navigation flop. But the memory of that night, deep growl, putrid stench, and the colossal creature in the dark clung like a shadow. He heard similar tales from veterans, stories of tall shadows, vanishing footprints, or the sense of being watched on night shifts. Some called it Dogman, a half-human beast of American folklore. Others spoke of Bigfoot or restless spirits of German POWs wandering back 40 without peace. Whatever it was, all agreed the land held a strange energy, as if perched on the edge of another realm. Jake never returned to back 40 alone, but he knew the forest waited, silent and menacing. It awaited the next soldier brave or foolish enough to face its secrets. Fort Campbell, for all its modern military sheen, couldn't hide its past's scars, from Cold War bunkers to forgotten graves. Back 40, with its haunting stillness, remained a silent storyteller, whispering tales only the daring could hear. Jake's story didn't end with clear answers, for back 40 didn't yield truth easily. It left questions hanging, like the crescent moon's light through trees, enough to see, not to understand. Was that creature real, or a product of fear and darkness? Did back 40 truly lie on a ley line, drawing ancient entities, or was it just a wild land feeding weary soldiers' imaginations? Jake, with a soldier's courage and a young man's curiosity, might never know. But he was certain of one thing. Fort Campbell and back 40 would always be where truth outstripped fiction. If you enjoyed this tale, hit subscribe and share it with friends and family in the US. Maybe someone you know has heard a howl in the night or seen red eyes in the woods.